Hey guys, Professor Bill, Comic Book University, and Miles Morales Spider-Man issue number 12. Dude, I've been loving this book, man. This issue is no different. It's fantastic. I'm going to tell you 5 things about why it's so awesome after we talk about who made the book. So we got Saladin Ahmed and Javier Garren on storytelling, David Curiel doing the colors, VC's Corey Petit doing the letters, Ken Lashley and David Curiel doing the cover art, with Lee Garbett doing the 2099 variant cover. And yeah, dude, this was cool. Let's talk about number 1 on this list, and that is a very familiar situation. Normally, I'd get annoyed by seeing another one of the Miles versus his Uncle Aaron stories because I'm just so sick of seeing them, right? This one was a little bit different. Why? Well, let's move on a little bit. Number 2 on this list, Man Mountain Marco. Dude, we need more Man Mountain Marco in our lives. Like, he is just the most ridiculous character ever, yet he's a genuine, credible threat. You never want to come across this dude. I don't care if you're the Hulk, it's a little bit different. But anything less than the Hulk, dude, like, nah, you don't want to play around with this cat. Like, he comes up, and I think this is the first time that Miles is actually fighting him. And yeah, welcome to getting your butt kicked, son. Him and freaking Uncle Aaron have to go at him. Ain't looking so good for our heroes, bro. Let's talk about number 3 on this list. Actual consequences. What? In a comic book, when does that ever happen? Uncle Aaron just went and got himself in a lot of trouble. Well, because Miles caught up with him and stops him from an assassination. This assassination was necessary, though. And when it gets foiled, all of a sudden, he's got to go and take the heat for it. Because he can't let that heat fall on his nephew. The whole thing is explained in case you weren't reading the past several issues. But dude, like, this was messed up. And it's one of those situations where it's like, I get Miles's point. I get it. I genuinely do. While at the same time, the rational side of me and the idea that Miles is still just a dumb kid. Yeah, man, Miles's morals, might have just got an assassination attempt on somebody else. Let's talk about number 4 in this comic book. This is a real comic book. Now, dude, like, there's a lot of times when I sit here and I look back on a comic book, back in the day that I read when I was a kid, like before I was in the double digits, right? And I'm like 7, 8, 9 years old reading this comic book, and I'm just like, this was a really great comic book. I loved it, but I go back and I read it now, and just like, the book was okay. It was cool. It was alright. It wasn't great though. It was alright. I just remember it nostalgically as being so much better than it actually was. Well, I think that's just because, I'm older, I'm looking at things a different way. Of course, I'm growing up. I'm saying, if you're going to write a comic book for me, if you're going to write a comic book period that I'm supposed to read, I'm going to be looking for different things than young Professor Bill looked. You know what I'm saying? When student Bill was looking at the comic books, right? So, that being the case, I look at this comic book and suddenly I'm reminded of back when I was a kid. See, I mentioned that there were consequences for Miles, but those consequences are also for Uncle Aaron as the Prowler right now. That consequence is he now has to run a gauntlet. So we've got 5 things that he's got to go through in order to get to where he needs to be. And it ain't looking too good. This reminds me a lot of Scott Pilgrim. Because, wow. Like, we're talking about Dragon Ball Z. Like, here's a gauntlet he's got to go through. And the failure is death. This is comic book writing, man. This is comic book writing. Speaking of that, let's move on to number 5 on this list, and that is the Storytellers. I know from talking to enough writers and artists that it is not easy telling people that you also tell stories, that you are also a storyteller if you're the artist. Because nowadays, the way that the rules usually work is the writer sends a message to the a text, whatever, to the writer, to the artist, and says, hey, I need you to draw this on this panel, that on that panel, and so on and so forth, right? It's hard to call them storytellers, but when you look at how expressive this comic book is, just that alone would definitely put Javier Garren on the storyteller list. And I don't know how easy or difficult it is for somebody like Saladin Ahmed or any writer to acknowledge, yes, I'm the writer, he's the artist, but we're both the storytellers. Because My old school thinking is, no, the writer is the storyteller. Granted, old school, it's the artist who's usually telling the story, right? But we haven't seen those days in a long time. Is that what we're seeing nowadays? I would love to be able to talk to some of the people involved in these comic books, and like DC, Marvel, all of them, and just like how exactly is the writing process nowadays? Um, what things does the artist do to be considered a storyteller as well? Because and I'm talking about on each and every comic book, and I want to know, I want to go like page by page if necessary. I really want to get the feel for how this works, because I get it. Like with some comic books like this, you can see it, but I'm wondering what things am I missing also. But for a comic book where pretty much everybody is wearing a mask except for the big dumb Mountain Marco guy, this comic book was especially expressive, and hats off to that. This was a really good comic book, dude. This made me feel like a kid again, and I cannot wait for the next issues to see that gauntlet being run. And that's, of course, when that really cool cover is going to be, bang! The first part of the gauntlet. These two got to go through the Rhino. Oh, me likey. Especially with the relationship that Miles is in now with Rhino, right? Looking forward to this, dude. Professor Bill, Comic Book University. Class dismissed.